I've called this episode of Language Thoughts the Apostrophe Apostles. There are some people who care very deeply about the way that we use apostrophes in written English. It seems to be a source of never-ending controversy. In this case, there's an added dimension as we're talking about the written representation of the Yorkshire dialect. I feel fully qualified to comment on this, as I once lived in Yorkshire for a couple of years and I've read Wuthering Heights twice. In all seriousness, any Yorkshiremen or women watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So here's the situation. North Yorkshire Council wanted to use dialect on the signage for a publicity campaign. The campaign was to encourage people not to drop litter in the street or to leave it in the park, but rather to get it in the bin, or get it in bin, or get it in bin, or get it in bin. Now, even if we know nothing about the writing conventions for Yorkshire dialect, which one of these would you guess to be correct? According to the Yorkshire Dialect Society, the body that concerns itself with these matters, it's the first one, the one with the apostrophe between the definite article and the noun. And here's the sign that North Yorkshire Council produced with the apostrophe in the wrong place. Now, it's not for me to say what's right or wrong in someone else's dialect, but I am interested in why someone might make this mistake, as well as maybe the meta-linguistic questions around how we perceive these things and how we talk about them. So I'm going to look at the merits of these different written forms in terms of how they represent the sounds of the language, the pronunciation, the parts of speech involved, and how we might expect them to interact with each other. And finally, I want to look at some specific issues relating to the representation of dialects in writing, which I think is the more interesting issue here. Now, I'm making an assumption throughout the video that the definite article, which is the in standard English, is written t in Yorkshire, but pronounced as a glottal stop. This is the usual pronunciation for Yorkshire speakers, certainly before a consonant. Whatever Michael McIntyre might have you believe, a Yorkshire speaker would not say toot lion, toot witch and toot wardrobe, but rather something more like lion, witch and wardrobe. I don't know if you can hear the glottal stop before each noun there. Sorry for the imitation, but I think it's important to make that clear. In fact, the characteristic t sound that people associate with Yorkshire is really a short form of English to the. So if a Yorkshireman tells you that he's going to pub, that's to the pub. If he's already in the pub, then he's in pub with a glottal stop after the in. Similarly, if they live by the canal, they live by canal and not by to canal. So the campaign is to get it in bin. I promise from now on to keep the imitations of the accent to a minimum. Of course, this t for the, even though it's pronounced as a glottal stop, is still represented in writing, and it seems that it's supposed to be joined on to one of the other words in the phrase. Does it join more naturally with the preceding preposition or with the following noun? Let's think first about the sound. If we join it with the noun bin, then we now seem to have a unit that starts with a glottal stop and then a consonant. Something like b. Does that work? Can we have a syllable onset with a glottal stop followed by a B or by any consonant? It seems impossible to pronounce, and it violates everything we thought we knew about English phonotactics, the implicit rules of how sounds are able to combine. How about if we join the glottal stop onto in? In. Yes, that seems to work. In fact, glottal replacement of t after a nasal is really common in relaxed speech, in such words as can't, went, flint, skint, don't, can't. No. So why not in? That seems to suggest then that I want to join the article not to its noun, but to the preposition that comes before it. Is that not a weird thing to do? Well, it's not for speakers of many other languages. Consider French. A plus le becomes o, or de plus le becomes du. Similarly in Spanish, a plus el becomes al. De plus el becomes del. Many other Romance languages have similar rules, but then so too does German. If we consider in plus dem becomes im, or indeed zu plus der becomes zur. So could we not have in Yorkshire in plus t becoming in? I think this would be a cool and unique feature for the Yorkshire dialect to have, and it seems to me to better fit the pronunciation. There's an elephant in the room though. I can feel someone shouting at their screen, but plenty of languages also join articles with an apostrophe onto their noun. Consider, for example, French, l'eau, or Catalan, l'aigua. I'm sure there are plenty of others that you can think of. Well, that's fine, but these forms exist to simplify pronunciation and to aid flow, I guess compared with la o or la agua. Interestingly, Spanish solves this in a different way by actually using the usually masculine article el for certain feminine nouns such as agua, in order to avoid having two stressed as together like you would have in la agua or la hada. They don't say that, they say el agua, el hada. This Yorkshire example though, with t bin, or as it's really pronounced, bin, seems to make pronunciation, if anything, more difficult. Again, a reminder that I'm not telling the Yorkshire dialect people how I think their written standard should or shouldn't be, and there's no reason why a precedent in a foreign language has to come over to your language, but I can see why people would be drawn to attach the t to in and not to bin. Whether we're joining the t onto the preposition or the noun, we might be inclined to mark this with an apostrophe. But what is it that an apostrophe does in English, really? Well, obviously we can use it to show a relationship of possession, like, for example, Paul's coat. But that's not what we're talking about here. Its other main function is to show that one or more letters have been omitted, like in theirs for there is, or aren't for are not. Are there any such missing letters in Gerrit, in bin? Would you be surprised if I said, no, there aren't? In written representation of dialects, it's pretty common to see things like o, or o, or t. This is controversial though, because in doing this, you're suggesting that there's something missing. But missing relative to what, if your word is o? The use of the apostrophe implies a relationship of dependence with some other spelling. It assumes prior knowledge of some other written standard, some other variety where this word is of. It points to another version of the word, a more complete version, a superior version. When dialect writers pepper their texts with apostrophes, are they kind of admitting that their dialect doesn't really stand alone, but rather defines itself by a series of contrasts with another variety, with someone else's dialect? For this reason, this apologetic apostrophe is rejected by many. Scottish writer Grassic Gibbon once said, "Apologetic apostrophes are cringe AF, bro." I'll put the real quote in the description. In practice, I can see that the apologetic apostrophe has its use when, for example, representing one character speaking in a regional dialect within a narrative that's written in a more standard form. Okay, so I've put these 3 written forms on trial a little bit here. I'll leave it up to you to pick your favourite and let me know in the comments. In the end though, does this kind of discussion do anything to promote the use of the dialect? Or is it perhaps a bit counterproductive? If I'm inclined to make or to record or to write something in dialect, but I feel like there's a risk I might be reprimanded by the apostrophe police, might I just not bother? The newspaper article here is well written, it's open-minded, and the people involved in the discussion all seem lovely and well-intentioned. But if it isn't getting people using the dialect at work, at school, in the street, in the shops, getting younger people and incomers more interested, encouraging its use online and in the media, then the argument about where to put an apostrophe seems somewhat moot.